This is Will Cadell here. I want to introduce you to the Spatial Finance panel. We have a couple more people who will be bringing on their videos and their sound. It's very exciting. We don't have any slides to share because none of us got that figured out. And also, we didn't want to waste any of your valuable time on a slide deck of stuff you've heard before. So we want to talk about new things, interesting things, and where we think that potentially the Earth observation industry is going. And I find it impossible to try and keep up with this stuff. Today, I learned that four now Earth observation or satellite companies have got, it's got more investment. We got Albedo, we got Satellite View, we got Satlantis, and now Spire, which altogether is like $100 million worth of investment. Just, I mean, that's just like today, or at least this week. It's another $100 million worth from the venture community into things that are Earth observation related. This is an astonishing time to be trying to wrangle pixels for the benefit of society. But that's exactly what we want to talk about today. I think this is a great opportunity. So we have some excellent people to dig into this. Starting in no particular order, I have June. Oh, this side on my left, I guess. June is running Catalyst, as was PCI, organization in transition, but sort of in the middle of the value chain. I think about it as like midstream. We have Florian, who's in my screen one further to the left. He's running a company called OilX. He's based in London. It's very late at night, so we very much appreciate his efforts here. For me, it's just lunchtime. Florian's just about to go to bed, so he's really in happy hour mode. Then we have so OilX is like an oil price index organization. So he's very much talking to the financial sector, but using geospatial data. We have Bill Greer, who's I'm lost there, down there. Bill is he works with Maxar, came in with the Timber.io acquisition, but is running their A-Wave product, which is all about triggering activities based off landscape change, just kind of pivotal to the next stage of remote sensing, but is also super well versed in what's happening in Maxar. And so directly below me here, we have Joe, who is recently moved to Umbra, who are it's sort of selling SAR imagery. So he's part of the SAR revolution, which I'm super excited about. But I want to give each person here an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I'm going to go around and ask in the same order each individual to introduce themselves, so I don't hack their bio apart like I just did. So June, will you kick us off?
No, I was just going to say that, Will. I think you just did that. So thanks very much for giving us a chance to talk ourselves. So as Will said, I'm June. I'm the president and CEO of PCI, now Catalyst, and we're a risk management solution. We help our clients manage the risk around their critical infrastructure, their land deformation issues, their climate accounting, and their credit and their loan portfolios, even their sustainability issues. Now, I bet you a bunch of you are looking and saying, what on earth are you talking about? This is PCI. And if I walked into any other company that was non-geospatial and introduced myself as the president of a company that was a risk management solution, I'd be like, great, tell me more. But as soon as I walk in and say I'm a geospatial software solution, their eyes glaze over and they're like, what are you talking about? That's rocket ships, that's something else. So in this conversation we're going to have today, I want us to think and talk about Earth observation intelligence. I want to talk about it differently. And we need to be talking about it differently to others outside of the geospatial industry so that they get it and they understand the power that we have in all of our solutions and everything that we're trying to do to push to the right of the value chains in many different industries, and also in users' hands that are non-technical, non-traditional users that we wouldn't normally speak to. So my challenge to the lads on the panel with me today is introduce your company, but don't use geospatial or any of the traditional language that you would normally do to introduce it. And let's start something different. So throwing it out, trying to be a bit controversial. Well, there you go.
Sounds great. Florian, how are you talking about this?
Thank you. Thank you, June. That's relatively easy in my case. So we are oil tech company, headquartered in London, Oil Analytics. We provide data and insights to oil traders at hedge funds, at investment banks, but also to ministries of energy in the Middle East. And for us, the leveraging data, let's say in all its facets, is really important because it gives us, we don't need to be anymore in Libya, for example, or in Saudi Arabia physically these days, and we can still understand a lot what's going on the ground. And I think that's the novelty about it. And I think I'm talking from a user experience. There's a bright future ahead. You just need to channel the use cases and the efforts in it. And yeah, I'm keen to be on this panel and hear all the views on the topic.
Super cool. Bill.
Awesome. Hey everyone, I'm Bill. As introduced, I'm at Maxar. So I've kind of been launching new products at Maxar for a while and playing with kind of what's in the new space while having access to, we'll just say, a lot of imagery and a lot of data. And I'm just really excited about where the industry is right now. I think we're starting to see an acceleration in the sensors and the data that's available and in the use cases that are growing because of all those. And I'm really excited about how geospatial technology works within the realm of the real world, right? I think there are a lot of other tech companies out there that kind of are tech for tech's sake. And I think there is definitely a stronger correlation in the geospatial industry to what's happening in the real world. And again, I'm typically a little bit more focused on trying to cater to commercial markets and trying to solve a lot of these like long tail problems. I think we know a lot of our industry caters to, you know, US government, Apple, Google, Microsoft, some of those larger short tail companies. And I'm really interested in that long tail commercial case of how we can get less technical users going down the value chain to use our spectacular data.
Super cool. Joe, how about yourself?
Awesome. My name is Joe Morrison. I am the head of product at Umbra, and we are launching a constellation of synthetic aperture radar satellites, which sounds kind of intimidating, but it's really not. It's a way of capturing satellite imagery that's kind of exciting in that you can see through clouds, you can see at night. It's radar, so it comes back like black and white imagery. And there's actually some measurements that come along with it that you don't get in a sort of traditional optical imagery setting. But the reason that I'm so excited about what we're doing is that we're trying to modernize the experience of purchasing satellite imagery. And I won't belabor that now because I'm sure we'll have plenty of opportunities during the course of the panel to talk about how the industry is changing and how Umbra is positioning itself within those changes. But my big stance is I nearly left the industry recently. I was so frustrated because there was a bunch of potential, all these satellite companies getting funding. Like Will, you mentioned, it seems like every week a new constellation is getting funding. But I was somebody trying to purchase data and use it to solve problems. And I could not purchase the data. I either couldn't afford it, I couldn't get somebody on the phone who would sell it to me, couldn't get access to it. And so it's kind of my personal mission to transform the way that data accessibility works in an industry that I think does have a ton of potential because of folks like June and Florian and Bill who are building applications on top of that data and really solving people's problems with it. But that's never going to happen if you can't afford to buy it in the first place. So that's my role at Umbra, is figuring out what the customer experience should look like for buying satellite imagery.
Yeah, I think pricing is a very interesting discussion. And yeah, you know, like only really boring business people would say pricing is an interesting discussion, but yeah, surprisingly interesting. Okay, so my name is Will Cadell. I run a not a geospatial services company to help June. But we write code and we help people with data pipelines and stuff. And we sort of run into a lot of these problems from both ends of the value chain, if you like. So we try and join things together with glue. And the reason that we're interested in this subject is because there is so much activity in this regard, and we're just consistently trying to get our heads around what on earth is going on and try and keep up with what's going on. Like I said, 4 deals got signed this week, but you know, who on earth is buying all those pixels? I mean, that seems like a lot of data. I did a presentation last year, and I was like, oh, I wonder how much data is flowing out of low Earth orbit, and I took a guess at 500 terabytes, and already I'm already saying like 1 petabyte, and our friends at Capella say by 2024 they're going to be pulling out 10 petabytes a day. This is all these metrics are per day, 10 petabytes a day just for them. And I think that seems like a lot of stuff coming out of the sky. So who's buying this stuff? I'm going to ask this question initially to pretty well everybody, but so satellites are cool and all, but outside of defense, what are the examples of like overt business successes that we can point at and somewhat emulate? Like, what's happening that you would say this is an example of what is happening that is something that we can take as an exemplar. I'm gonna do a role reversal here, and I'm gonna throw it to Joe straight away.
Yeah, not a ton. Answer your question. There's not a ton besides intelligence gathering. In terms of it's the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and I think part of the reason for that is that optical imagery, which has historically been the main type of imagery you can acquire commercially, it's very difficult and expensive to produce at high resolutions. The best in the world at it is Maxar. We have them on the call. But to make those 30-centimeter beautiful images, when you go on Google Maps and you zoom around the satellite imagery layer and you see that, it's just the laws of physics. You need an aperture that's several meters across, which means you need a bus that's several tons, which means you need to spend several $100 million to launch that satellite, which means you can't just give that data away for free. So intelligence and defense, that's who has the big budgets, and that's who needs to monitor lots of the Earth. But most of the really killer use cases for that data, it's not obvious. It's stuff like Maxar donated satellite imagery to the OpenStreetMap project, for instance, which a lot of people have never heard of, but pretty much every map besides Google Maps you've ever used is powered by OpenStreetMap data. And that is literally hundreds of thousands of people around the world hand tracing roads and labeling them, and then building up a real map of the world in real time at massive scale. There are tons and tons and tons of applications that happen downstream of that. That's what I kind of refer to as a static or a foundational mapping use case. And that is 90, 95, 99% of the use cases for satellite imagery that we've ever seen in a commercial setting, which is a little ironic because the majority of the uses for satellite imagery in the defense space are not mapping, it's monitoring. It's figuring out when people are coming and going, how many airplanes are at that location right now, what model airplane is it? It's intelligence gathering. And so, yeah, that's gonna have to change in order to unlock a lot of the value, especially for the financial markets, where it's not just a matter of knowing where the fields are, but it's a matter of knowing when they've been harvested or when they're flooded or when that water event has affected a building that they care about. Part of why I'm kind of optimistic about the space, and I stayed in it and I joined a synthetic aperture radar company, is that if you remove the variable of clouds, so 2/3 to 75% of the images that you try to go take with an optical sensor, they're cloudy. Synthetic aperture radar sees through that. It's got a lot of disadvantages too, but if you just remove that one variable, suddenly the logistics of capturing imagery on a more regular basis and sort of guaranteeing that you can go see that area at a high resolution, it becomes a lot simpler, which means it becomes a lot cheaper, which means you can charge a lot less, launch a lot more satellites, move a lot more data, open up accessibility to a broader audience. So I'm sure June and Florian can talk about in a lot more depth what monitoring use cases look like from a risk mitigation standpoint or from an intelligence gathering standpoint. But I think we're at the very, very early dawn of the era of commercial applications of monitoring the Earth using satellite imagery, because the unit economics associated with new modalities like synthetic aperture radar are literally orders of magnitude different than optical. There will always be a need for a foundational optical layer to be able to figure out what you're looking at. These data are not easy to interpret. They're pretty strange. But just the ability to like use your internet connection and go task a satellite and it takes a high resolution image and gets it back to you within a day, that doesn't really exist for almost anyone today. And you might think it does because you see marketing about it and you see startups that are doing analytics and all that. But the reality is that's a very, very, very rare workflow. It's not going to be rare in 2-3 years, but it's been almost exclusively a defense use case up to this point. So the use cases, to answer your question, that was a long-winded way of getting to it, but the use cases are minimal today. And so, that used to make me sad, but it makes me kind of excited at this.
What you're saying is at some point, I'm going to be able to task an Umbra satellite to take a picture of my kid's birthday party in the backyard. So you're saying?
Yeah, I don't know why you would do that, but
I don't know. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just the ability to make a decision. I want to take an image of this thing and measure it. And to Bill's point, it's in the long tail of use cases. It's something that most people would never care about. It's something personal to you, but capturing an image of it could be really valuable or really important or really timely. That doesn't exist today. And so people building applications that allow for that is really exciting to me.
Cool. So let's move on. Let's move on to Bill. Any exemplars you're seeing in the industry that we should be pointing at and talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I know that you're trying to, have some controversy here, but I generally agree with pretty much everything Joe is saying. I think a lot of the use cases that we've seen from legacy Maxar products and things like GVDX were that a lot of our customers want to actually focus smaller areas. And so I think this is where the economics start to come into a useful focus, right? Is the short tail customers do want to do this like global mapping or all of the United States or all of Russia, right? But when it comes down to it, commercial customers want to hyper optimize for their areas of interest that they're focused on. And I think once we can start to do that and understand that, then we can start to, again, figure out the tasking and the revisit that's needed and the resolution that's needed for those use cases. But it is a long tail, right? So I think it starts with understanding the need of the customers, which is typically for commercial customers, a more AOI centric or limited scope area. Once you figure that out, then we can start to build to those standards for our users. So that's a lot of what I'm focused on right now, is trying to make it with two goals on the monitoring of small AOIs, which is one is to reduce latency, because the older the imagery is, the less valuable it is. I think there are use cases for archive imagery, but that new stuff is the good stuff. And then the second thing that I try to focus on in our products is to reduce cognitive friction, right? Which, going to June's point, is we're a technical industry. And so if you actually want to get adoption on that long tail, you need to make it easy for customers to use. I think at that point, and Maxar is more of kind of like, I'd say like a bulk imagery provider to other people that build out those use cases. But I think if we can make that pipeline to cater to those commercial pipelines, then we can enable all the cool things that are coming up. And yeah, I think there is an exciting future there. Again, to answer your question more specifically about markets, obviously oil and gas are interesting and big, and I'll avoid talking about that because I would put to shame. But I think there's also some really interesting like forestry, carbon markets. We're seeing a lot of, I would say, climate change, both on disaster preparedness, cleaning up disasters, carbon sequestration, and emissions. And I think that there's a large and growing market there that could have a global scale as well. But that's
cool. But I echo what you're saying. We see projects where somebody wants something just about their area of interest, and then the other project is we want the whole of North America, and it's like there's not much in between those two things. It's like I want a tiny thing, and I want it to be cheap because it's tiny, or I want North America, and they also want it to be cheap because it's volume. So it's interesting.
Well, and it's 300 tiny things spread out everywhere.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the other. Yeah, that's the other one. Yeah. It's funny. Florian, you are the exemplar in my mind. So so tell us about what you're doing, and if you see other organizations in the financial markets themselves doing similar kinds of things.
Yeah, thanks. So indeed, we are, what we're looking at is we are agnostic to the type of technology that we use. We are starting with the use case. And I think that's the biggest problem that I oversee in this market is that you need to find a solution to the problem first. And we have still today, plenty of vendors approaching us and say, hey, we have this, but then they apply to 5 different verticals as well, to real estate, to agriculture, and all sorts of markets. But for us, we are working on the oil sector only. So if you say even before, Bill, you mentioned oil and gas, we are even more focused on I wouldn't call it a niche because it is big in its own right. We are strictly focusing ourselves on oil. We start with the need, with the problem, and then we go out and understand what space as it can help us. And we use SAR a lot. A lot of what we do is SAR, optical as well, more as a base layer indeed to find our way. AIS, satellite AIS largely, and infrared. And we are super keen on unfortunately not around. Maybe now with satellite view and albedo. Thermal. Thermal, I think, is what the oil and gas industry has been waiting for ages. And because it's just, binary assessments of assets being hot or cold. Already that would help you to find something out, if something is cold in central Siberia. And I think the use case, is there a market? I think there is in everything that moves around, and in my area is commodity trading. So everything that you move from coal from Australia or South Africa to China, you have an open pit, you have vessels that move, and that's the same what we do in oil as well. We follow the supply chain. So, and in the past, in order to get access to that information, many companies have spent billions in order to get that information edge by having representative offices or owning these assets. That was the only way how companies like Exxon, Shell, BP were in the past had this information edge. Nowadays, you actually can remote sense a lot of that, a lot of those activities. So I think everything that you move, and it can be containers, and it can be coal, iron ore, agriculture, everything that is open pit and moves on vessels or pipelines over long distances, I think is an ideal use case. The only issue is, which I think, and that's a point that I want to stress, is that you shouldn't forget that these industries have been around for 100 years. They haven't been waiting. They have been solving their problems efficiently, and the markets have been functioning for 80, 100 years already or more. And they have so they have means of going along. So you're not going to pay up infinitely. There is a threshold to it. And I think that's important to keep in mind. So the use cases are there in the commodity sector for sure, in insurance as well. I think the insurance market increasingly are also tapping into it. But I think it's about what we call creating a digital twin of a physical supply chain. I think through sensor data.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, we often think about like wherever landscapes are changing or humans move, there's some level of value to be measured at least, and I think that's maybe one of the core messages sort of to take forward. But whether that and then you have to find out who values that measurement the most and start talking to those people. June, who are you seeing in the market that you look at and you're sort of impressed by the way they've presented themselves?
I think there's still so much everything that the guys have said before, which sounds kind of sad to hop on the back of it. But when I look at what we're doing, and I'm going to focus on us because I'm impressed with what the team is doing in terms of our technical transformation and how we're approaching the opportunities in these non-traditional spaces, in these non-traditional industries and applications. I mean, we're really taking a massive technical pivot in terms of the delivery of the science and putting it into the non-traditional users' hands, and from a very agnostic way. So I appreciate that the domain expertise needs to be there in each of these, but really starting with what's the problem that we're trying to solve, and from our perspective, I'm going to use a different example rather than the stuff we've touched on before, like the infrastructure, critical infrastructure, or insurance, credit, portfolios, all that kind of stuff. Look at ESG funds. I mean, hot and heavy just now, there's so much attention on that. You can use our science to validate their claims that their carbon emissions are the way that are reporting where they're supposed to be, or their climate account. You can go out there and externally validate these types of things. I mean, look at how powerful and the impact that that can have on the capital markets itself. So when I look at what am I impressed by, it's every day my team, and they're the people that I'm most impressed with in terms of the industry itself. I mean, I'm watching it go down. Every day it changes. Every conversation you have, you learn something new. Somebody's uncovered something else that we all need to share, learn from, and then benefit from, and continue to push to the right. So a bit of a different answer probably than you're expecting, but that's our.
It's good nonetheless. I'm an acronym Nazi. So what's ESG for those of us who are not so well?
Environmental sustainability. I'm losing the G part, but somebody will pull it off me. But
okay, cool.
Okay.
Awesome. So we have a couple of comments rolling in on the Q&A. Jeff Zeiss pointing out GHGSat captures imagery but doesn't sell imagery. They sell information around emissions, which I think is a great point. Vivian Wu has got a question on Joe's comment. Joe's comment was data was too expensive and needs to be affordable. Price stroke data cost is rather subjective concept. What would be deemed affordable? So that's a really interesting question. Should it be in the context of percentage of overall program budget or something else? But I'd like people to dig into this notion of pricing. We've referenced it a little bit. Some of you might be in an awkward spot around imagery-based pricing and whether you can comment it or not. But I'd like to talk about pricing in general, but then I want to talk about what would it mean for the new reality, which is I want access, or I want my algorithm to have access to a pixel, but I don't really have to have a situation where a pair of eyes sees a pixel. So what happens if a pixel never gets bubbled up, but does get used by an algorithm? Should that cost a different sum to whomever is paying for the service? So I'd like to open that up kind of to the floor here. Maybe Bill might be a good place to start because you're doing some of that kind of algorithmic work in terms of triggering landscape sort of basic changes.
And it's interesting because I think, again, Joe made this point already, but licensing becomes a big issue with the price, and then things get confusing and hard to sell because, we'll discount for, like, we put out open data for free, for example, so we typically don't make a ton of money on natural disasters. There are no natural disasters, that's a whole other thing. But disasters and humanitarian aid, and so we have a hard way of going about pricing that because, again, licensing is a huge issue. So I think you need to solve a lot of problems there before you can get to the pricing. I think I've done a lot of research on, again, if we never provide the imagery and we're just working with those derivatives, I would say the market is starting to figure those things out, but there's still pretty wide range of, I'd say, depending on what you want to do, object detection, change detection, or other, or again, custom analytics on top of that. But I think we're getting to a point where I would say I'll try to be specific here, $3 to $5, I think you can start to really get some of that long tail usage in per square kilometer. That's hard to get to. And again,
so do I get to phone up my Maxar rep and say, Bill said it was $3 to $5, how about it?
Yeah, but if you try to do the actual access our raw imagery at that, obviously that's an order of magnitude.
Yeah, I know.
And it's really hard, right? Because you need to take that into account. And that's one of the difficult parts at Maxar is that and tasking gets even more expensive. And then again, a lot of this is also super dependent on the licensing. So, I would say that $3 to $5 number is usually internal use only, and you can't really do anything with those vectors except use it internally.
But maybe that solves a large number of these problems. Maybe that's all you need. Just to, you've been asked to figure out if a place is changing, and all you need to do is look at that place over time. And if it's not changing, no one needs to look at it. But if something has happened, then people might want to have a look. So therefore, you're accessing that image for a more robust purpose subsequently. But to have access to that monitoring capability is quite an interesting concept. And I think the place that we are in the industry, the sheer number of sensors in the sky feels like monitoring is a core piece of the offering that the remote sensing community is providing. Does that seem reasonable, Joe? You're in a similar boat where you get to actually design these things from the ground up. Does that seem like a reasonable approach? What's it going to look like for you guys?
Yeah, I'm spicy about this topic. I'm just going to be honest with y'all. It's broken. We're in a broken industry. One way to know that it's broken, Bill, how much does a Maxar image cost?
Per square kilometer for the whole image, for where was the image taken?
It's not really possible to say under what licensing conditions. June, how much do you pay for synthetic aperture radar right now?
Couldn't tell you. I know my guys are struggling. The new solutions that we're building and trying to struggle coming up with pricing models. I mean, we're building the solutions and depending on the extreme is all over the place in terms of what we can offer, and it just kind of blows the model out of the model out of the water altogether. So it's different across the board.
If
depending on the supplier.
They probably forbade you from telling anyone else how much you're paying for the synthetic aperture radar.
No, not at all.
So the trouble with this industry, in my opinion, is that people won't just pick a price and stick to it and publish it and allow people to plan what their business is going to be on top of that and give them a license that allows them to build a business on top of that. It just doesn't exist. And so what people do is they build businesses around Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 and Landsat because it's free and it's available and they can depend on it and they can build something on top of it. And then you build an oil inventory on top of that that gets popular. And then people are like, can you give me more frequent updates? Can you give me more specific, like tighter error bars? And you say, well, not really, because then I would have to get a deal with an imagery provider that would allow me to do that. And I have to go negotiate that every single new opportunity that comes in. It's just ridiculous. Like satellite imagery is a raw material, like cobalt is a raw material. It should have a price, and cobalt can be used in smartphone batteries and it can be used in like autonomous vehicles and electric vehicle batteries. It's probably not in your watch battery because it doesn't make economic sense for it to be in your watch battery. Satellite imagery should be the same way. So when I say it's expensive, I don't really just mean that it's expensive per kilometer or on an absolute basis. I mean that it's expensive in terms of the time to negotiate a deal, to go try to acquire the imagery, to know what you're even getting into. And then if it's that difficult and there's that much opaqueness, you're not going to draw up a business plan that relies on it unless you own the satellite constellation yourself. Those are the only people that have any certainty about what their cost basis is in this industry, are the folks that own the satellite imagery, the production, or the folks that build products on top of the open stuff. So the open stuff's the best thing that ever happened for analytics. But in my opinion, we need satellite imagery providers who are willing to take a stand and say, this image at this resolution with this footprint costs this many dollars. It can cost $500,000. It can cost $500, but you have to pick a number and stick to it and publish that. So, I mean, that's part of what I'm working on at Umbra, is setting up a system where we have transparent pricing, where there's one license for every use case. So if you want to buy the imagery from us and give it away, you can do that. If you want to build a derivative on top of it and monetize the derivative, you can do that. If you want to resell the data, if you can find some sucker who will buy it for twice as much as we're selling it to you, go ahead, be our guest. But eventually they'll figure out how to go to the source.
So how much are you selling that for, Joe?
Pardon?
How much are you going to sell that for?
So right now, our first system that we're launching 2 satellites this year. They'll be producing imagery in spotlight mode. And right now we're working through the process of getting board approval to publish our pricing. But this year you'll see public pricing. You'll go to our website, see how much it costs. And part of it too is the physics of synthetic aperture radar, we're launching sub 200 kilogram satellites. That's where most of the cost is, the cost to actually launch these things into space. So I anticipate that our pricing will be it'll literally be multiples less than what the book prices are for what some of the incumbent providers offer. But those book prices are just a negotiating tactic, because if you've ever bought imagery in volume, you know that you get discounts on it, and it's a custom negotiation every time. So at the minimum, being able to set a price for an image, even if it feels expensive for some use cases and feels super cheap for others, that's how you build the foundation for an efficient market, a normal market. And I think that's going to create a lot more opportunity for people to be entrepreneurial and build on top of satellite data.
Florian, does that ring true with your experience as a consumer of data?
Yeah, so a lot of it resonates definitely. So Joe has a couple of points, and I can tell you maybe a bit our own journey exactly in this direction when we were going out and looking what would be the best provider for us. And we ended up to be, because our solutions have to be either micro, which we will allude to, or macro. Micro on super zoomed in on Cushing, Oklahoma, and understanding every storage tank upside down there. And then at the same time, as you rightly said, they want to see everything in the US and maybe even Russia and China, you know. And so our base layer is built around Sentinels, the Sentinels 1 and 2, and Landsat for VIRS. And that's the base layer. But then I think there is a case to enrich selectively at the areas where it's important to be super sharp and or high frequent, like Cushing, Oklahoma, maybe to enrich that in those areas like Rotterdam, Singapore, maybe Western Canada. We monitor Western Canada, Hardesty and Edmonton a lot, and that's important because there is those are premium locations. So for those, Umbra or so could be an integration. Let's talk, Joe, later about it. But the market, the beauty is, as I mentioned before, the market dictates a bit the price towards us, and that's also the price that we are willing to pass on. And the current solutions for Cushing, Oklahoma are drones or planes, and there are vendors in the market that offer that, and that's a data stream that is offered in the market, and it costs per license. It's called a number, $50,000 per year to get that license, one number per week. And then you have to work around that. Can you provide the number 4 times per week, 5 times per week, 7 times per week, more precise, and 5 times per week? And I think that's the speed and the accuracy are the things that you need to beat. And only what we notice is only if you beat quality, speed, then you can talk to command the same price, because once the solutions are entrenched with the users, it's very difficult to get them used to something new. And I think the market often dictates the price that we can then purchase data for on it. Now, I say that now those are for the regular businesses, and that's how I would like all of you guys, when you try to sell to companies like us, to think about it, that we have a recurring monitoring of the world. So monitoring Cushing, Oklahoma every week, important. But then you have situations like the Suez Canal, for example. I think the Suez Canal story, a lot of companies jumped on it on the geospatial side, but I felt it was missing a bit. It could have been a fantastic chance for the industry to really show off the capabilities to understand what's the damage, what's the blockage, how long will it take to clear up, what's the damage to economy. Those things came, but it took days, and it took a lot of different companies. So I think you have this, besides the regular services, you have these massive events. We had a bunch of them in the oil industry. It never disappoints you. You have them all the time. So we had the drone attack to Saudi Arabia infrastructure. I think in that moment, I think you can command a very high price. If you can deliver on the spot, on day, I think if you can make the difference and provide the insight that the market needs for insurance, for oil traders, in that moment, I think you need to be able to deliver, you need to have the pipeline ready, then you can go into a premium. For the rest, the market will dictate with the existing alternatives. As I said, many industries already have figured out how they tend to operate. So you need to be more higher frequent or more accurate than that.
Cool. So June, what are your observations on sort of pricing of pixels? But I also want to extend that and think about what do you think it's going to look like for algorithms that are kind of run on demand? I know that you're providing sort of a midstream service level opportunity for organizations to run algorithms. What will that look like on demand? Is that going to be sort of a similar kind of pricing challenge? What should we expect?
Yes, Will, you just kind of threw me a bone there. We have been working really hard in terms of opening the black box that we have in our traditional, the Geomatica, the GXL that everybody's known and loved over the years. We finally figured out that the secret sauce is open up and expose those algorithms, put the API wrapper around them and get them out there so that we can partner with technical users, the guys that are out there developing the applications to help us solve these 21st geoscience issues that we've been talking about. Or if there's companies that want to embed and partner with us and take our science or algorithms and put them directly into their own offerings. And whether we white label or partner with them, I mean, it's a perfect example of where we see this play going and how we need to operate differently, like expose the black box, get the science out there. You can pre-can the workflows that are needed, whatever it is. And then also our insight solutions is the next level to that, where it's the non-technical users. They've got an end-to-end solution where they can pick their data, select agnostically what kind of data, depending on the price point, and then select the workflows of the image or the area that they're most interested in or the problem they're trying to solve, and then visually display that. So really you, from our perspective, our model and what we're seeing is pay for what you use and put the data or put the science where the data is and consume it how you want to and expose it how you want to. So that's really what we're seeing and what we're most excited about. And the transformation with PCI, now Catalyst, that's where the biggest uptake has been, and the change in the engagement with the enterprise clients and partners that we're seeing. So yeah, data is absolutely a huge part of that. So depending on the latency and pixels and all that good stuff, it can be super expensive, but there's other alternatives there as well, depending on what the need is.
So we're talking about a cloud-focused, like cloud-centric model where we have on-demand imagery and on-demand algorithms.
Absolutely.
On-demand imagery pricing, on-demand algorithm pricing. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm conscious of, it's amazing discussion. We're almost running out of time soon. But I'd like you guys to comment on what you think the geospatial company of the future needs to look like then to sort of capture some of this value. What are we seeing? Is it a company that doesn't look like a geospatial company, or is it something else entirely? So let's throw that at Florian, because he's built one of these already.
So the one notion that I want to get across here, that we have been educated by the European Space Agency. Also, we are funded also by the European Space Agency to use a new term to distance ourselves from Earth observation, and us being a downstream business that turns data into something to talk more of the industry of Earth intelligence, has this nice similarity to EI and AI. So I think we are going to, the panel already heard me using it on occasions, but I think I'm going to really use the term Earth intelligence. And I think that's what it then actually boils down to. We need intelligence, we need insights. And I think how you get that, whether our traders, they don't care whether you have a drone, a satellite, they're for a millisecond, they are super excited about it because everyone loves satellites. But then again, everyone loves drones as well, and planes. So, you get a 5-minute attention span, and then afterwards they say, okay, what does it do? And we have cases in Rotterdam where individuals take images with drones, with planes, with satellites. Everything is on the market, and you need to differentiate yourself. So I think it's important that you understand the use case very well. And I know that it's always said, but our traders don't care how you get the data from. They wanna our clients. They want the answers to the problems. And I think that is what I often have, even when we talk to vendors and discuss imagery. They say, yeah, we have a team that is dedicated to oil and gas, but then you talk to them, but they don't speak the same language. And I think it's really putting the sleeves up and really understanding how difficult also is. I have the fullest respect how complicated and complex everything is geospatial related. But trust me, hedge fund industry and financial markets is also not for the faint-hearted, in terms of they all have their nuances, their problems, and a lot of brain power also goes into these industries, and they have been around for ages. So I think it's listen actively to the use case and try to put yourself in the shoes and try to listen, not throwing the technologies at the user, but actually hear the use case. What do you really want to sort out? Because maybe it might be SAR, but it might be optical as well, or a combination of the two. And I think it's that's for me the number one paramount thing that I see is not happening yet. That the use cases are well enough understood to go to the last mile. And we have seen in the oil industry very big organizations entering without mentioning any names, and then actually moving out again. And I think it's not because the market wasn't there, it's because there was the product market fit wasn't there. And I think that's the focus that you need to have. You need to create something that the market is eventually ready to buy.
So it sounds like we need to collide like real domain expertise with a potential for understanding the technology. Does that ring true of what you've seen, Bill? You've created a couple of product teams before.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the big thing there is that I don't think anyone has the full solution on the imagery side, right? I think we're going towards a multi-source future. That's why it's exciting to see the acceleration in new stuff getting launched, right? You know, there's obviously like SAR and EO complements to each other. Again, then there's the licensing issue, and then there's also analytics on multi-sensor stuff. And then again, going back to, again, the vertical specific stuff where you do need to understand the verticals or allow a product that's going to allow those verticals to not have to understand your stuff as much, right? I think having more transparent and more accessible data, and then more transparent and more accessible algorithms is a huge step towards that. But how you do that, I think, is not understood or figured out yet. So I think that's also the exciting part, right? Is it going to be just an end user product? Is it going to be a lot of different verticals for or different products for each vertical? And then also, where does it happen between, you know, the remote sensing side, the analytics side, or do we go all the way down to like statistical, right, information? So there's kind of a value chain in the data where we go from remote sensing, which is pretty complicated, hard to work with. We typically pull vectors out, we get into that kind of GIS use case scenario, which has more users. It's a little bit harder to monetize some of that, but then you can get all the way to the kind of BI statistical data also. And it's trying to figure out who's going to own what parts of the chain, or if someone really wants to make a big bet and try to own all of it, but that's a lot. So
yeah, I wonder if the geospatial companies of the future might not be disseminating that much data on maps anymore. I wonder if the map kind of, I mean, I love maps, make maps all the time, but I wonder if it kind of gets in the way a bit. When you're trying to sell a map to people who actually just want an umpire array to put in their algorithm. You know, it's, yeah, I don't know. I'm willing to be proven wrong and all that kind of stuff. So I've got another couple of questions up my sleeve. There's some comments rolling in on the QA. Dan Weismar say, just noting that Google Earth Engine for some analysts in the research space has solved a lot of problems out of the box. Certainly in terms of data availability and ARD, it kind of solves a lot of that kind of stuff. And boy, can they process stuff. Not sure if they have a overtly commercial model yet. So I'm not sure how that rolls. Someone did ask earlier, but I noticed the questions disappeared. Does Maxar have a different pricing for back catalog stuff? Bill's nodding. Yes.
Yeah. Archive imagery. Again, there's kind of if you task imagery versus instant access to the imagery versus archive imagery. I also think there is really interesting use cases in that archive imagery that, again, we tend to push people towards tasking and newer imagery, but making that available as training data, I think
Training data.
Everyone.
Training data. That's going to be the new gold, isn't it? You got to train the machines on something. Everything's a new gold these days, whatever. I have a question that I'm gonna point at Joe, and I'm gonna say to Joe, why is there so much SAR capacity when very few people know how to use the thing? How does that work? How do the economics of that work? I know you were kind of talking through what synthetic aperture radar is, but there seems to be like this massive capacity for SAR right now. Or maybe I misunderstand. So I was hoping you could sort of talk us through that and how we should be thinking about that in terms of its delivery to others.
Yeah, there's not a ton of capacity for SAR currently. There's a lot of headlines about SAR.
Sure, okay.
But in terms of satellites on orbit, the trick with SAR is that in order to take a really high resolution image, you need to dwell on an area for a long amount of time. And that's called spotlight imaging mode. The longer you integrate, the higher the resolution image you can pull out of that. Now there are other modes where you're gathering area over larger extents, but what happens is when you slew the satellite to look at that area, you're in space and the antenna attached to that satellite picks up vibrations and it sort of wiggles. So if it's like a radar sat, I think has a stiff board or an ISI, it's like a board wobbling in space. You got to wait for that to settle down. It's called settling time, excuse me. If you're like Capella, they have almost like, imagine like a trampoline, similar thing. The trampoline is sort of like vibrating as it waits to settle down. So that's actually a huge constraint because you have to kind of point at the area you're going to image, sometimes like minutes in advance of getting there, so that you wait for that antenna to settle down so you can take an image. So these systems that exist today typically are extremely throughput constrained. So even though, you know, on paper they might have the energy capacity to take a bunch of images, they would all be blurred if they just tried to whip out a bunch of images really quickly. That's actually a huge reason why I joined Umbra in particular, is that the antenna design at Umbra, which is patented and was the first time I ever heard of them, it's got these ribs around a mesh antenna. And those ribs, everyone thinks the magic sauce is that it folds up into this really tight ball, and that way you can launch it really cheaply. And then when it gets to space, it unfurls into this massive antenna. Everyone thinks that's what the innovation is, because that's what the patent's all about. But that's not why it's exciting. The reason it's exciting is that those ribs, once deployed, are shock absorbers. So that brings the settling down time from minutes to like sub-second. And that means that you can just whip that thing around and take spotlight imagery as fast as you can point it at the next target. And that's why I think Umbra is so exciting. And I think, you know, ISI, Capella, RadarSat, Airbus, eGeos, there are a lot of SAR providers. They're only launching more, like everybody's. And the reason they're launching more is that they're sold out. Their capacity is sold out. They're not launching more speculatively. It's that they can't meet demand for the imagery. But there will come a point pretty soon, especially if we're successful and we're able to produce as much imagery as we anticipate, there will be a lot more supply than there are people that know what to do with it. And at that point, that's when all the fun stuff is going to happen. And that's when, honestly, companies like Sparkgeo and Catalyst, I mean, you'll be 10-year overnight successes because you'll put in the work when the data wasn't really easy to access. You'll figure out how to analyze it. And then suddenly when the pricing pressure comes down and the supply goes up and you can do all the use cases that people have come to you asking for years, suddenly you'll be in a strong position to have a head start. And, you know, the computer science grads at McAllister or wherever who are doing hackathons will be able to get some free data and try some stuff out, and it won't be a pipe dream. Like, they'll actually be able to build real use cases around that. So when I joined the industry, like 2015 or so, we were 1 or 2 years away from the data being super cheap and accessible and everywhere. And there were hundreds of millions of dollars going into the industry there. I was still waiting in 2020 for that to come to fruition. And I honestly don't believe it's going to happen in optical because of the problem of clouds and because of the physics of how large those lenses have to be in order to capture imagery. SAR, I think, is going to be the first thing that unlocks monitoring as a use case that's affordable because the unit economics work. And then that's going to make the optical more valuable, because if you've ever looked at synthetic aperture radar, it is hard to understand what is happening in that imagery. You want a high resolution optical image underneath of it. So that's why folks like Maxar, they're some of the best analysts in the world too. They're not just a satellite imagery provider. The analysts that work there are the best in the world at what they do. They're just as good at using synthetic aperture radar to do analysis. So I think, yeah, I think there's going to be opportunities, but yeah, it seems like there's a lot of supply. Today there is not a lot of supply.
So we should be looking forward to an oversupply within a couple of years. We need a couple of launch cycles to roll through for that amount of sort of, I guess, data capture capacity to be up there.
Yeah, if that doesn't happen, that means that $300–400 million just got lit on fire in the last 6 months.
Possibly even more. You know what? I never thought I'd be talking about the saddling time of Joe's ribs live on the internet. So that's exciting. But thanks very much for that. So we've got 5 minutes left here, team. Is there anything that we haven't talked about? Where are the new markets? Maybe that's a good subject. What should we be digging into? June, do you have any observations there? Anything you want to bring up? Final thoughts?
Well, I mean, I've been on my soapbox ever since I joined Catalyst or PCI. I mean, there's so many different opportunities, industries, applications that are untouched that we're only just starting to scrape the surface on. I mean, I keep raising them. We just need more people out there talking about geoscience, geospatial, talk about it differently, talk about it in business terms, talk about it to business people, follow the dollars. Like the amount of money that, whether risk mitigated or created, there's so much potential, but just it's an untapped market. So all these guys that are, all these teams that are out there building applications, domain specific, like Florian's done, getting the data out, making it accessible, making it available. I mean, let's just go. Let's stop talking about it. Let's get people working, get the governments behind us. Working with academia, I mean, it's not one trick pony. It's not one of us that's going to figure this out. We're all in it together. Let's get our heads at it and figure it out. But there's so much potential. There's space for everybody, pardon the pun, but there really is. There's room for all of us to be getting at this and just get going. So off my soapbox, handing it over to.
I was going to say, Florian, because what does the geospatial community need to do to deliver more value to your organization, so you can subsequently pass that on to the trading community?
Yeah, so we need, we have one problem often that we don't understand what's even possible. You know, like let me bring you the example of maybe let's take thermal, for example. You know, we need to understand how big is a pixel? Is it 100 times 100 meters, or is it really better than that? Because then we start talking, and then I think often the conversation that we have with companies triggers that, oh, what you telling me, this is possible, and then say, yeah, this is possible. It's very easy. And I have this conversation. We have an Earth observation data scientist on the team, and he often says, you know, he gives me the most bizarre answers. Hopefully he's not listening in now, but he gives me binary answers. He says, to things that I think are easy, he tells me impossible, and to things that I say, oh, this must be hard, and he said, well, I got you that in 1 hour. And then I say, okay, how is that impossible? There is such a misunderstanding between the use case, and I think it's the communication will help, and the education. I think it's the education of the technical possibilities, and really because that then triggers new thinking processes on it. And I think one thing that I would beg everyone is, we could die a death by 1,000 POCs, and I think that's the POC for me. It's for us as a company, it's dead. Either you have a clear route to the market, or we leave our fingers from it. And I think it's we see so many companies left, right, and center try a lot of POCs all the time, but they never can get out of there, and they never really tested in the battlefield. And I think that's important. I think that's important to understand also from the vendor. You know, we can get a bit of sandboxing data to play around, but then let's do it together. You know, we are here. We are happy to. We don't have infinite budgets, but we have a lot of ambition, and we understand the use cases, and maybe that's worth a chat already, you know. So I think I would say communicate and show what it can be done, but also then try to, on your end, try to understand what is needed, what's possible on the other side as well.
Great stuff. John's going to kick us off here any second now, but do you have any closing thoughts, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I again agree with everything. The big thing that we need to do on the imagery side, right, is your revisit and your resolution are two major differentiators. After that, it's about trying to get that resolution and that revisit rate to customers in a way that they want it and need to use it. I think that's where accessibility of the data and then kind of openness with methodologies becomes really important. So again, I think there's an exciting future. There's a lot of, everything is accelerating in the industry. So I think you're going to see new companies doing exciting new things. Again, I think from what I've seen and heard of Joe's licensing model, I think that should create industry pressure that should make the rest of us better. And I think, you know, as companies like Albedo come online, that's going to be, you know, that's the first time anyone's tried to push on the resolution that Maxar has, because we're really good at it, right? And once we launch Legion, our revisit's going to be pretty out of this world, another space fun. So it's going to get more competitive. I think, you know, we're in a really good position as Maxar, but I think that's also going to push us to partner more. And I think, again, I'm already seeing a lot of use cases where we need SAR and SAR needs us. And again, there's other thermal and RF and other cool sensors coming on that will create more opportunities and better use cases for everyone.
As a Scotsman, I can only agree that stuff getting cheaper is better, so that's good. And sorry, Jude. Joe, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll keep it super short because I know we're up against time, but I would just say this is a fun time to be focused on this industry because none of us are competing with each other. We're competing with the status quo. So there's a lot of room for creativity, but it's not pretty work. It's like long nights, lots of explaining, lots of getting in the complex, deep weeds and then explaining things simply to people who don't need to know all the details. So yeah, I would say right now is a great time to be getting involved. And if you've heard anything from the panelists today, I hope you've heard, find a problem, maybe geospatial data applies to solving it, but find a problem first and then come to us when you need a little bit of help or you see an opportunity. Don't start with the data and go looking for problems. So that would be what I would leave people with.
Well said.
Perfect. Well, we'll sign off here. And I guess my final note would be remain curious. And away we go. Here's John kicking us off. Great stuff.
No, you can finish.
Thanks very much, panel.
No, you can finish.
We're all good.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Will. Thank you, panelists. That was very interesting discussion. I think there's some provocative thinking there. Thank you for sharing that. So this is the end of the second day of GeoIgnite. I want to thank all of the participants and the speakers today and our sponsors. We're going to be coming back tomorrow with a keynote from the World Geospatial Industry Council. Barbara Ryan, the executive director, is also going to be continuing on a theme of Earth observation. So I'm hoping everybody can come back and check that out. So thank you all very much.